Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the summary for the day of 588 for the 4th of October. Do check if you are subscribed. No, maybe you haven't subscribed and you thought you did. So let's start off with the Crimean, the Black Sea. The Ukrainians managed to land forces north of Orekhiv, around this area here, in this northwestern part of this region, this peninsula, and 4 landing groups managed to land. There is 3 jet ski with 1 boat, and then they managed to land, and then they engaged into battle with the Russian border guards. So, and then at least one of these Ukrainian soldiers were eliminated, and information later came out that there was actually 1 Ukrainian soldier that was captured. He's very muscular, and he was at first was misidentified as some colonel, which is clearly not possible because that's a bit too high ranking to go on a raid. But so after that, they did establish his identity somewhat, and they managed to ask him questions and what is the objective of this raid that they are doing. So apparently after the interrogation, it was established that the purpose of the group was to take photo and videos of the DRG participants against the background of a Ukrainian flag on the territory of the Republic of Crimea. So basically, their job is just to land on Crimea, to take photo with a flag on Crimea to show that they are in Crimea. They're like, typical Ukrainian stuff. No, it's a Ukrainian thing. No, we will not understand. No, it's a Ukrainian thing. So let's carry on. So the rest of the troops actually managed to run away, and so the airstrike was actually caught upon this running away vessels. So I think they missed. I think they did not manage to hit the targets. At least two of these 4 vessels managed to reach the gas production plants and evacuated. So well, maybe some of these oil rigs, and they managed to run away. So that's the end of this episode. But it does give the Russians a lot of PR ammunition to just spray like Rambo, something like that. No. So anyway, moving on. There is a Ukrainian aircraft, MiG-29, that was shot down over Sodatski, around southeast of Kryvyi Rih. So the word they use is intercepted in the translation. I think it's shot down. They just try to be creative. Over at the Zaporizhia front. So this is the Zaporizhia front. At the Zaporizhia front, we have a geolocation of actually this geolocation is actually possible archival footage of Ukrainian forces over at this position. So this caused us to kind of change the front line a bit, to reflect this possible front line that is different from what we have previously, was actually along the river. So anyway, we shall continue to monitor if that's the case, because it is archive footage. We're not sure when exactly that happened. Over at the Orekhiv sector, this is the Orekhiv sector. The Russians launched massive counteroffensive operations in this region here. As you can see, most of these highlighted icons are all mostly the Russian side, with the Russians attacking southeast of Maratomashka, northwest of Verbove, at Verbove, southwest of Verbove, and in the south of Robotini. There is Ukrainian attacks in Novobroken and the west of Robotini, and towards Kopani. But if you look at this structure, the way how the arrows looks like, it doesn't look very, very good for the Ukrainians, especially considering that the Russians can actually close this gap if the Ukrainians are not careful. Going into the sources, the Marushinikov is the one that reported about the fighting towards Kopani. They say that they managed to conduct some counterattack in the direction of Kopani. There is a Ukrainian Defense Ministry reported about the fighting west of Robotini. They mentioned that they have partial success west of Robotini, which suggests that the Ukrainians are trying to capture the rest of these trenches, perhaps to establish the buffer zone that I always talked about around the western part of Robotini. There is geolocation of Russian forces southwestern part of Robotini. by Crimean Caprice, which suggests that the Russians are still in the area here. They are still very near to the town of Robotini. Most of the fighting is mentioned by Ukrainian Defense Ministry and Rybar. Rybar only mentioned fighting. Ukrainian Defense Ministry said that the Russians are attacking in the Robotini region. So the Russians are probably attacking as per the previous reports of fighting towards Robotini. So far I don't think there's any progress in that sense. The Rybar reported, along with Maroshnikov, the Russian and the Ukrainian source both reported that the fighting by the Ukrainians is towards Novoprokopivka, and most likely is in this direction on the more on the eastern part of the Novoprokopivka, and where they're attacking this way. So you can see this is the kind of a strategic situation in this region here. Over at the Verbove region, the Russian forces, according to Surya maps, show that the Russian forces managed to recapture some of these forest line that the Ukrainians have tried really hard to capture. So they were actually being pushed back by the Russian forces in this sense. They lost, the tree lines lost is around like this. These are the tree lines that was lost by the Ukrainians. So it's quite a lot. And the Ukrainians did have a lot of trouble trying to reinforce all these positions because this is very deep into Russian controlled territory. They get drone strike, artillery strike, air strikes, and usually the forces that was occupying all these trenches that was previously held by the Russians is merely squads. Squads of troops. You can't hold lines effectively. So the Russians actually managed to counterattack according to Surya maps, southwest of Verbove, as well as immediate western part of Verbove. Ukrainian Defense Ministry and Rybar both reported about the attack, about at least the fighting in this area here. So this is very significant, if you ask me. And this Russian offensive continues north of this position as well. According to the Russian Defense Ministry and Remelin, Remelin is the pro-Russian source, they reported fighting in the northwestern part of Verbove and near Malatomashka. Of significance is that the Russian Defense Ministry actually mentioned this attack. They say that a Russian group of forces supported by Air Force managed to attack the Ukrainian positions. So most likely is actually in the southeastern part of Malatomashka as well as in the northwestern part of Verbove. So if you look in this way, in the bigger picture along the entire front line around the Verbove region, this attack is actually pretty huge, and this is actually pushing back the Ukrainians in this sense. So let's see how this goes. This is a huge reversal of roles in the Orekhiv sector between the two forces. Over at the Velika Novosilka sector, this is Velika Novosilka. In this sector, the tide of war seems to also lies on the Russian side. Other than the usual, the Russian Defense Ministry reported repelling an attack close to Priony. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry actually reported that there is fighting in the area of Novobroken, which is actually over here. This is Novobroken, and at Rivnopil. So in the area of Rivnopil. So this is both Ukrainian Defense Ministry's report. So you can't call this Russian propaganda because it's by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. And so this is the strategy picture that looks like in this area here. Of significance is that actually this looks like a spectacle, right? This is spectacle. Then this is the okay. Anyway, so there is geolocation of Russian forces by Crimean Caprice around this river region in the forest line, and this actually caused us to update the front line in this region, showing that the Ukrainians actually had been pushed back from this area here that was previously captured by the Ukrainian forces. So the Russians have re-established their defense line, perhaps in this area here, pretty securely, and we are not sure about this site north of Priony, because the Ukrainian Defense Ministry keep talking about fighting in the area of Novobroken, which is actually a very unusual, I would say. So let's continue to monitor this front line and see how this goes. There is also geolocation on the southeastern part of Uruzaine. at the very end of this tree line, Crimean reported that there is Russian forces in this area here based on the geolocation, where the Russian forces was attacked by a quadcopter of the Ukrainian armed forces. Away from the Velika Novosilka sector, we move into the Donetsk front. At the Donetsk front, there is fighting also reported by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry near Zolota Nevra. So Zolota Nevra is over here, and to fighting to be in the area of this region means that the Russians actually launch an offensive or attack from Novodonetsk towards Zolota Nevra. We will continue to monitor to see if there's any other information that can corroborate this, and to shed more light into what exactly this is about, because it's kind of unclear. So this is by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. So not Russian propaganda. This is Ukrainian propaganda. Yes. So we move on. Over at the Marinka region, Marinka sector, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry also reported massive Russian attacks in this region here, from fighting reported at Novomihadivka to at Marinka, as well as in the area of Krasnohorivka, all in the same report: Marinka, Krasnohorivka, Novomihadivka. So the Russians are attacking in this region here at the usual at Marinka and towards Krasnohorivka. So the Russians are attacking everywhere, and this is Ukrainian propaganda. Because it's from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. What you want me to do? Geolocation of this one of these attacks was actually geolocated by Crimean with a Russian tank traveling in this area here. This actually had happened before. There was previous drone footage that showed this sort of attack before, and so the Ukrainian forces was along the tree line, and the Russians were attacking in this area here, with the Ukrainian forces holding this position. And this is just a tank attack. There was no assault group that was shown. So this is definitely just a raid on the Ukrainian defensive position. So fighting over at Marinka was also reported by Marinka, and so the fighting at Krasnohorivka is purely by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. So over at this Avdiivka front, so in the north of Donetsk city, this is Avdiivka front. This is Avdiivka city, and the Russian forces is reportedly attacking at Nevelsk, and the same report also mentioned Opitny. This is by Marinka, the pro-Ukrainian source. And however, the Russian Defense Ministry reported that the Ukrainians are the one attacking over in the region of Nevelsk or Nevelskoye, and also at Vodian in the same report. So this is by the Russian Defense Ministry Yoke group of forces. Marinka also mentioned Performaiske. So depending on how you want to look at it, the Russians are attacking in this area here, while the Ukrainians are attacking in pretty much similar regions. So exchange of attacks, if you put it that way. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry simply mentioned fighting in the area of Avdiivka. What is weird is they mentioned about fighting near the Latoshkiny district. Latoshkiny is here. So the Latoshkiny district, I'm not sure how large it. How do they? Is this the Latoshkiny district? No, I have no idea. Because Latoshkiny is actually here. The front line is actually here. So even if the Russians are attacking in the Opitny region, to stretch to Latoshkiny is a bit far. I'm not sure. No. So let's continue to monitor. As usual, this is not the first time the Ukrainians said this. The previous time they mentioned the same way is on the 14th of September. So we move on. In the north of the Avdiivka city, there is fighting reported at Krasnohorivka, according to the Yoke group of forces by the Russian Defense Ministry. So we shall continue to see how this goes. If this is actually an attack against on Krasnohorivka in this region here, because things are very vague at times. We move on from the Avdiivka front. We move into the Bakhmut front. This is Bakhmut city. At the Bakhmut front, we have fighting reported along this front line. This is where the main Ukrainian offensive, the remaining Ukrainian offensive, the main one, east. So fighting is reported all the way from Clichevka to the southwest, north of Andriivka, and Kupiansk, whereas there is also reports of Russian counteroffensive in the Clichevka region and Andriivka. So sources of information coming from Marinka, the pro-Ukrainian source, that reports the battle all the way from Andriivka to Clichevka, which is replicated in the information over here. But the Andriivka was also mentioned by the Russian Defense Ministry, as well as Marinka further mentioned about fighting in the east and the north of Andriivka, which I then updated over at this position in the southeastern part of Clichevka or north of Andriivka. The counterattack was by the Russians is reported by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and in the same statement they also mentioned about Orekhiv, which is actually on the northern flank of Bakhmut front, which I will mention in a while. So in the information at Clichevka, we have the Russian Defense Ministry reported about this, and the counterattack was reported by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. So we're not sure exactly what is the situation over here. There is no clear mapping at the moment in this front line, because everybody's just attacking each other, and there is no clear front line that was being reported. In the northern flank, as I mentioned just now, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry mentioned about the fighting at Orekhiv, with the Russian pushing in this direction. We shall continue to monitor to see if this is accurate. Tentatively, nothing. There's nothing to be reported at Siversk front. We move into the Crimean front. So at the Crimean front, we have Russian Defense Ministry reported that the Ukrainians 21st Mechanized and the 12th Azov is attacking in the Yampolivka and Serebransky Forestry. So Serebransky Forestry in this area here, and Yampolivka is further up in the north in this area here. So this is only reported by the Russian Defense Ministry. And there is fighting reported at Torske and Torske. According to Ryba, the attack was reportedly repelled. And then the Ukrainian Defense Ministry mentioned about fighting northwest of Dibrova. So Dibrova is over here. So northwest, the Russians are attacking in this area here. So Ukrainians are attacking in the Torske salient, and then Yampolivka. So so this is the strategic picture that over at the Crimea front. So let's see how this goes. Move on. Further up north at Machiaveka, the Russian attack in the region of Machiaveka continues. It started off from the 1st of October. Now on the 4th, we are still seeing reports from Ukrainian Defense Ministry and Marinka. So Marinka mentioned that the Russians actually managed to advance up to half a kilometer, and then they were stopped. He claimed there is a huge casualties on the Russian side, and they say that these battles are reminiscence of Novobroken battle, which is actually further up north over here. Novobroken battle is actually pretty significant, because the Russians actually managed to push from Kovalivka all the way to Novobroken in this major advance at Novobroken. So to claim that the Russian advance over in Machiaveka is similar, and they claim that it's a half a kilometer, in this mapping is actually very, very little. But it is interesting that he made this correlation, and it is actually a bit similar, because Novobroken's battle is a bit out of nowhere, in the middle of nowhere in terms of the front line, and Machiaveka is also similarly in the middle of nowhere. So if you look further deeper into Machiaveka region, half a kilometer, 500 meters, this is just like this. It is just this short. It's very, very short. So this mapping over here, you can see that half a kilometer is actually not much. So that basically you can't even tell if there's any change in terms of the mapping. So we will continue to monitor to see what is up on the Russian side about this attack on the Machiaveka region. The entire attack on Machiaveka is purely mentioned by the Ukrainian side. So we will continue to see what is this about. The Russians have been keeping mum about the Machiaveka region. So let's see. There's nothing over at the Sviatove front. This is Sviatove front. We move on into the Kupiansk front. This is Kupiansk, and this is the Kupiansk front. At the Kupiansk front, Marinka continued to claim that the Russians are attacking in the area of Clichevka. They say that they are storming Clichevka, and he also mentioned about Sinkivka. So this is purely by Marinka. No one else is talking about this, with the Russians attacking this area here. But if you are watching all the way to this point, you probably can tell that the Russians are on the initiative and they are on the offensive with fighting raidings at Kupiansk region, at Clichevka and Sinkivka. There is Machiaveka. There is some counter battles in the Dniprova region, while the Ukrainians are actually the ones doing the main offensive in the Serebrentsky Forestry and the Torske salient. Whereas there is some kind of a reports of fighting at Orekhiv. Ukrainians are mainly attacking south of Bakhmut, and then we can see there's a lot of action in the Avdiivka fronts in this area here, over in the Marinka region, over in the Velika Novosilka sector, over the Verbove, north of Verbove in the Orekhiv sector, with the Ukrainians actually pushing westward at Orekhiv sector. And you can see based on the arrows, it's mostly the Russians are the one making the offensive, and this is actually very telling. Rumors abound about Russians going to do some major offensive in the next window of operations. Meanwhile, if you are lost, we are now in the conclusions. All these rumors come from all sort of places. My position is that the Russians have no need to go on the offensive, because by right, that this is a condition. This is a condition to the Russian offensive. There should be another offensive by the Ukrainians, and the next offensive is supposed to be with F-16s as air support, maybe even some other European aircraft that we are not known yet. And then we are probably going to see, or definitely have to see, Abrams tank, Leopard 1s supported, reinforcing whatever they have left tentatively with AMX 10s, Leopard 2s, Challenger tanks, because we haven't even seen much of the Challenger tanks in action. These main tank units, with whatever remaining in terms of infantry fighting vehicles and armored vehicles, will form the bulk of a bigger, I would say probably bigger, because Leopard 1s are in the hundreds, and so a bigger second Ukrainian offensive, and that would be probably the last, because the West would not be providing anything more than all these things, because everything else will be new and advanced and cutting edge, and the West will not put this in, because putting this in will be putting strategic forces into the Ukraine war, and that will actually weaken the West, and the West will not want to do that, because the idea of Ukraine war was never to be a NATO versus Russia war. This is just a proxy war that the West wants to drain Russia, and the Russians know it, and they also want to use this to drain the West, which is also happening, because the Western part actually miscalculated in terms of how powerful the sanctions can be, and apparently the sanctions did not really hit Russia that heavily. What's worse is actually push Russia into a much more stronger geopolitical position with the rest of the world minus the West. So this is geostrategical battle that is being played out in Ukraine. Ukraine is just pawn at this point. They are just pawned by both sides. Russia don't really want to kill the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians just keep wanting to fight, and to the Russians it's like, okay, no choice, we just fight because you want to fight. And the West is just using Ukraine as foot soldiers to fight the Russians, and this is basically what is happening right now. But the situation in the West in terms of the politics is looking quite bad. The anti-war sentiment is starting to grow much bigger, especially in the United States, which is actually very pivotal, as they are the one that is providing the most money, and maybe the direction that the Europeans have to follow is looking really bad. And if the United States, even without Trump or any other new president taking over Biden, that will go anti-war in Ukraine or to make a deal with Russia. If before that happens and United States decided to cut funding or support to Ukraine through the House of through the lower house, which is the what's it called, Congress, and then we will see a premature end to the Ukraine war, or at least a premature end to the support to the Ukraine. And this is actually possible because given all these different media, the Western media, they're suddenly becoming not like Russian propaganda. They are feeling like Russian propaganda, saying things that many neutral sources or even pro-Russian sources are saying for more than a year now, is that the West will not be able to keep up with all this support, and the Ukrainians are actually not doing so well on the battlefield. And all this neutral and pro-Russian thoughts is starting to leak into this pro-Ukrainian medias or Western media. Is actually a very, very bad sign for Ukraine. I don't see this as I see this as a very, very serious change in terms of rhetoric, and this is actually quite bad. And when you look at Zelensky saying statements like, even if the support ends, we will continue to fight. This kind of statement is actually very telling that Ukraine is bracing themselves for the unimaginable, the end of Western support for Ukraine's war against Russia. And if you look at this map, full of red arrows, this is not even the offensive yet. This is just, I would say, positioning, tactical battles. This is not even the main offensive. The Russian side have already mentioned that they have formed a major offensive force that is already filled with contract soldiers. This is not even mobilized. These are contract soldiers. They have so many people joining the army to the point where they have full offensive forces that is filled with contract soldiers, and they are war manufacturing, constantly pumping out totally new equipments, BMP3s, new T90s, T80s, new TOS-1As. All these new equipments are not even at the front line yet. Whatever that is fighting at the front line is already being filled previously. What the Russians are lacking was ammunition for certain type of weaponry, like the Grad. We haven't seen a lot of the Grad videos or drone footage of Grad bombardments, because the Russians pretty much run out of it, and production of it is just not that fast. And rumors coming from German media is that the Russians are using Iranian Grads, and all these ammunitions coming in is going to help the Russians to do the operations that they need. The Russians have the vehicles, they just don't have the ammo for many of the things. In fact, a lot of this long range missiles or rockets that the Russians previously was using, we have not even seen them for a long time. Smerch, the Uragans, the whatever, or some other the long range missiles that I cannot remember the name right now. We haven't seen them since the first half of the war, because the Russians probably use up all the weapons, all the ammunitions, and they are unable to produce this at scale. And if they are producing all these ammunition, they are revamping, retooling the factories to mass produce all these things, and we are still not seeing this in the battlefield. We haven't seen many of these major long-range weapons that previously that was used in the first half of the war. Then the Russians might be actually keeping them in stock. They are accumulating all these things, just like the T90s, just like I haven't even seen BMPTs for a long time, the Terminators. We haven't seen footages of them for a long time. Did they get destroyed, or were they pulled into the reserves? And then are they being used to form new formations? We do not know. A lot of things on the Russian side is not natural in the sense that it doesn't fit with the Ukrainians' narrative. I know the Ukrainians are saying that they're destroying the Russian forces and whatnot, but the reality is when you look at the big picture, you looking information from both sides, you look at the confidence, the narrative, the words, the rhetorics from the Russian side, the Russians are hyper confident, and this is actually crazy. So the rumors of Russian doing the offensive, like I said, there's only one condition. If the West stop providing the arms, if suddenly the Leopard 1s are not going to come, if the Abrams tanks are not going to come, because there is only like 10 that was delivered into Ukraine right now, if more of these promised weapons are not going to come, suddenly they are all withdrawn. For example, the Germans suddenly renegated on their words to give the Taurus long-range missile, the long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine. And this is actually very significant because this come after the threat by Medvedev that the Russian previous president and prime minister, he actually warned that if the Germans use the Taurus, give the Taurus to the Ukrainians, the Russians will strike the factory in Germany, directly inside Germany, as that is to them an escalation and probably somewhat of a declaration of war against Russia, maybe. And Medvedev is just, he's spotting a lot of very crazy stuff, but the Germans are worried. And if the Germans take a word of a maverick seriously, then you can know that the real situation in the western part that is supporting Ukraine is actually quite bad. So all these things adds up. One and another slowly adds up, and it just builds up into something that is very worrying, if you are on the Ukrainian side or the anti-Russian side. And my position remains the same. The Russians are not going to go on the major offensive. They will probably go on some offensive. They will go on some offensive to improve tactical positions, maybe recover some of these lost positions. Perhaps the Robotini in the west of Verbove, maybe Clichevka, perhaps, just to put back the line that they previously prepared, and to dare the Ukrainians to come back again. That's the most I think they will go. But like I said earlier, the condition, if the West cut their support, I think Russia going into a major offensive is actually very highly likely. So anyway, thank you for watching. For those that are watching on the main channel, they are watching the conclusions, and I think this is just very important messages that I want to reach out to more people. And if you want to continue to follow the war reporting of Ukraine, do check out the DPA War channel. And if you are already on the DPA War channel watching the entire full SITREP that is declassified, do subscribe, and do share the channel to everyone. And it's important. The more people, the more average view there is, then the less need for the SITREPs to be under paywall. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next update.